The armies gathered at Kurukshetra stretch across the horizon. Thousands of chariots, war elephants, and infantry stand frozen in the heavy morning mist. The absolute stillness on the field is deceptive. The physical standoff pales next to the catastrophe happening inside the commander's chariot. Arjuna's mind is violently unraveling. The Bhagavad Gita identifies a specific vulnerability in human anatomy. When the senses fixate on the terrifying details of the world, they hijack the intellect. The mind is swept away, acting exactly like a ship driven off course by a gale-force wind. This translated passage isolates the cognitive vulnerability. It states clearly that the mind is the only true ally we possess, and simultaneously the only enemy capable of destroying us. The commentary details exactly how this internal sabotage occurs. When attention is constantly consumed by external stimuli, immediate fears, desires, and the noise of the moment, the intellect loses its grip. Without conscious restraint, the mind actively turns against our own rational intentions. It weaponizes our own psychology. It loops past regrets, projects future disasters, and magnifies the immediate threat until the capacity to make a single coherent decision is completely paralyzed. Attempting to organize an army, execute a strategy, or simply survive a crisis is impossible when the internal command center has already fallen. Diagnosing this systemic failure is the necessary prerequisite for any external action. The Gita does not sugarcoat the difficulty of the problem. It describes human consciousness as restless, turbulent, and immensely stubborn. Arjuna admits his complete inability to stabilize his focus. He states that trying to subdue his anxious thoughts is as futile as trying to grab the wind out of the air. Rational thought requires structure, but sensory input operates as a relentless, chaotic barrage. The intellect is constantly under siege. Relying entirely on sheer willpower inevitably fails. Its finite endurance eventually fractures under the infinite volume of sensory noise. Engaging directly with the chaos accelerates the collapse. Actively fighting an anxious thought or arguing with a fear requires paying attention to it. That attention provides the exact energy the thought needs to grow stronger. You cannot punch a hurricane into submission. Because the mind operates with the raw, mechanical force of nature, meeting it with brute force guarantees defeat. A completely counterintuitive psychological mechanism is required. The commentary prescribes a two-part mechanical solution. The first is Abhyāsa, defined specifically as the habitual practice of training the mind to remain steadily focused. It is the continuous, active conditioning of the attention span, forcing it to lock on to a single target. The second mechanism acts as a critical counterbalance, Vairāgya, or objective detachment. This is the practice of observing a distracting thought enter the mind without doing anything about it. By simply watching an anxious projection or a seductive memory arise and refusing to feed it with an emotional reaction, the thought starves. Without the fuel of your engagement, the distraction naturally dissipates. The operational loop is straightforward. The moment you notice the mind has wandered, you detach from the thought and steer attention back to center. The failure rate is absolute. The mind will slip its leash and escape 1,000 times. The objective is not prevention. The victory is the retrieval. True mastery is returning the mind to its center 1,001 times. Through thousands of repetitions, the internal architecture reorganizes. The frantic impulses lose momentum, condensing into a dense, stabilized core of concentration. A disciplined mind experiences just as many distractions as an untrained one. The difference is the speed of recovery. Abhyāsa builds the reflex to return to center, while Vairāgya eliminates the friction of the distraction. When this cognitive training reaches its peak, the internal weather system breaks. The turbulent thoughts settle, leaving behind a state of profound psychological silence. The Gita provides a precise visual metaphor for this state. It compares the mastered mind to a lamp placed in a windless spot, where the flame does not waver. The physical world outside the lamp could be enduring a hurricane, but because the internal space has been hermetically sealed against the drafts of anxiety and desire, the flame remains perfectly still. Arjuna opens his eyes to the exact same battlefield. The chariots, the enemy armies, and the probability of death have not changed one single degree, but his perception of the data is completely restructured. Divorced from the paralyzing fear of failure and the desperate craving for success, the intellect is free to process the situation with cold, objective clarity. Actions can finally be calculated and executed with absolute precision. The internal equilibrium translates immediately into physical control. Free from psychological static, the commander lifts his weapon, aligned with the grim necessity of his duty. The external environment will always remain chaotic, hostile, and beyond human control. But by engineering the total stillness of the internal environment, the world is permanently stripped of its power to break you.